gonna get going. All right. Well, thanks for being here, Matt.
Sorry, we got a plan.
Oh, we got a plan. Perfect time. All right. Thanks for being here, Matt. So I'm sitting across the table from my good friend Matt Cookson. Okay, I'm gonna start over again.
No, that's right.
Because all of a sudden it dawned on me I might have said it wrong. All right. Well, thanks for being here, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. So I'm sitting across the table from Matt Cookson. And Matt, you and I met because your wife and I both do real estate together.
That's right.
And you got yourself into an aspect of music that I've been following since I believe you started. And I wanted to talk with you about it because I'll give the quick history. When COVID hit, we were locked down. And it was funny because Mary, your wife, and I were both doing remote sales meetings. And it ended up being pretty entertaining because there was lots of alcohol involved.
Yep.
And then one day after one of our sales meetings, she sent an email out to everybody and said, "Hey, my husband's doing this online music. You need to check it out." And Emily and I did. My wife, Emily, and I did. And I've been following you ever since. And it was just a fantastic break from this, we're going to flatten the curve of COVID. And every Friday, we would listen to you and what you were doing in music. So I want to start by, having you tell that story a little bit and, explaining how you got into it and why, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that was a very weird time, wasn't it? And I certainly hadn't planned on using Twitch, which is a game streaming service, to get my music out to people out in the world. And so, I guess going back a little bit further as to why I even started getting into that in the first place. I can say back at the beginning, I started making music back in the 90s. And so I'm in my 40s right now. I was a teenager back then, and I started listening to a lot of dance music. At the time, I started listening to a lot of heavy metal when I was early in my teens, but then I started to get into dance music and started feeling like I wanted to actually start producing this music. And back then, this was the days before the internet, of course. I mean, the internet was just coming on, but we didn't have any YouTube. We didn't have all these video tutorials or anything like that. And so I was listening to the artists that I really admired, and I was trying to emulate what they were doing, and I was having a really hard time with it. So I have a great respect for the people who were creating music back then. And just this week, I saw a picture of Daft Punk and the home studio that they had and all of the equipment that they were using at the time. And these artists were really just like feeling their way through it. There were very few avenues that you could take to go and to learn how to make electronic dance music. It's probably why so much music back then was so bad. But,
right.
You had people like Daft Punk who were really at the forefront of what was happening back then and figuring out themselves. And I was trying to do the same thing. And I was trying to figure everything out. And like I said, I was having a hard time. I was reading magazines, trying to learn how to use this equipment. And, there's nothing harder than reading about music and trying to figure out how to use equipment in that shape and form. And so it never really went anywhere. And I started to let it kind of subside, and then I became a parent, and things really kind of just quietened down at that point. And then it was just before COVID broke. I thought to myself, look, I really want to start getting back into this. And I saw a university friend of mine who had always been into the same sort of stuff as me back in the 90s. I saw that he was releasing music, and I was like, what? Okay, I mean, he's managed to do this. He's a parent as well. Maybe I can do this as well. And so I started to get back into it. And I was so far out of the scene at that point that I had to kind of reacquaint myself with who the big artists were, what the styles were, what kind of equipment they were using. So I really started to learn more about this. And then I bought the equipment. YouTube is a blessing. It's a curse and a blessing, but when it comes to learning new stuff, it really is a blessing. So I started to watch tutorials and start to learn about stuff. And I thought to myself, right, I want to get out and I want to start playing music for people. There's the producing aspect of music. There's also the performing aspect, and particularly in electronic music, they're really divided into almost two separate areas, because you don't have to be a producer to be a DJ. You don't have to be a DJ to be a producer. They kind of go hand in hand, but you can be one or the other. But I thought, okay, I want to get out. I want to start DJing, and I want to show people my music. And then COVID hit.
Right. So much for getting out.
Exactly. I had just started going out in Seattle and starting to figure out, who are the promoters, who are the people I need to be speaking to. And then suddenly everything closed down. And that led to this very unusual time period where all of these DJs and all of the people who were out listening to music all of a sudden couldn't do that. For someone like me who had kids and I was stuck inside for the decade before that, looking after children and raising them, for me, it was kind of wonderful, because all of a sudden I was in the same position as all of these other people, as opposed to feeling like I was really missing out on all of the clubs and the music that was happening out in this world that I couldn't be part of. But with COVID, everyone was trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep this going? And then it was a friend of mine said, hey, you should think about streaming on Twitch. And I was just like, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Are you crazy? But then I looked and I saw that a lot of people were doing this. And it was, technically copyright infringement to go and play other people's music on Twitch. And so there was this big debate in the community about, is it okay to do this? Are we going to get caught out? And there was a point where some of the larger labels started saying, okay, you can't be doing this. And they started going off to Twitch, and then Twitch was going and muting the music on people's streams. But in the community that I'm in, the kind of music that I play, which is trance, progressive house, it's not quite the same. It tends to ship on smaller labels. People I find are more grateful when you play their music than saying, hey, you should be paying me for this. So
are you're playing somebody else's music, and then are you mixing on top of that? That's
right.
That's how you're producing something.
Yeah. So like I say, with DJing and producing, they're almost like two separate but related entities. So you find back in the day, back in the 90s, when you had folks like Pete Tong, Paul Oakenfold, some of these names that are familiar to people who are, in that world, they were really just DJs. They were finding the records, they were going out and playing them. And what was interesting, what was wonderful about that era was it was often hard to find this music. And so if you wanted to hear particular tunes, then the only way you could do it is if you went to go and see a DJ who had that music. These days, music is ubiquitous. You can find it on so many different digital platforms. So many people have the ability and the opportunity to go and DJ that DJing itself, I feel like, is not exactly a lost art. There is still skill to DJing, and a lot of that skill is selecting the right music, but it's not the same as it was back then. These days, if you really want to make it as a DJ, then you really need to be producing your own music as well. That's my sense, anyway.
Do you feel that the style of music when you first started was significantly different than the style of music when you got back into it, or did you pull from your musical tastes back in the 90s and bring that forward to today?
I'm going to get quite deep into the style of music that I'm into here, which, when I was in my late teens, like I said, I was really into heavy metal. I was really into very hardcore, like a really quite emotional, evocative, rock music. And then I really kind of made this transition very quickly to trance, which is a sub-genre of dance music, which tends to have very evocative, emotional melodies. And in my opinion, there's not a great deal of difference between these two types of music. They elicit the same emotion in me. And so I think, well, people may really be into one or the other, and they can't stand one or the other. Like, to me, they're very much the same. They're the kind of music that I would want to go and listen to live and really kind of get into it, and it really, just generates that kind of emotion in me. So that's what I got into. And in terms of how the music has changed, I would just say it has slowed down a lot. So
slow down?
Yeah. If you go and listen to early 90s dance music, some of it is like 150 beats per minute. It's just super, super quick. And I'll name check the Prodigy for one. That they are, one of the real breakout groups from that time. They really made it in America, as well as, being a big group in the UK. Some of their stuff is so fast. And even when I was mixing back then, I'm like, oh, I really have to dial up the tempo here to try and match it to this music. But steadily, I would say, over the last couple of decades, the kind of music that I'm into has dropped down from sort of like the high 130, 140 beats per minute down to like the mid 20s. That there is still that subgenre of stuff that is plus 138, but I would say it tends to be older people who listen to that now, people who really liked what was around back then. So yeah, I would say it's definitely slowed down.
When you're mixing, it sounds like math is involved in this. I mean, really. So when you're mixing and you're taking some music, you have to be thinking about the speed of that music so it matches up when you're mixing from song to song to song to song. At what point are you adding your own music into that, or is that something totally different?
It's related. I mean, the music that I produce, if I want to have my music fitting into my own sets or into the sets of DJs that I want to be playing, then it's got to be within like the same range. And so if I go and produce something that is like super fast or super slow, then it may fit very well into someone else's set. But in terms of what I'm playing, in terms of, like I said, the DJs that I respect and look up to and want to play my music, then yeah, I do have to be thinking about that. And for the kind of music that I play, it's very flowing. It tends to just blend from one tune into another. And so you've got to be thinking, when you're producing music, am I producing music that is going to fit well into a set with this kind of music? And that even goes for the tones of the synthesizers that you're using. It's quite important when you're producing music to be listening to the music that you want it to relate to. Otherwise, it can be very jarring when someone is kind of in the vibe and they're in a club and all of a sudden something sounds a lot harsher, a lot different. It's just like, what's going on here?
So are you producing music with the intent of people to dance to it?
Absolutely.
That's what your mindset is 100%. As you're trying to put that out there, knowing that there's going to be people on, that are at a festival or somewhere that are just dancing like crazy.
Yeah, that's right. And it was kind of funny because my dad, like, it clicked with him at some point last year because he listens to the music that I listen to and he appreciates it and he supports me, but it's definitely not his thing. And so I'll say, did you like the last song that I put out? And he said, well, I like the middle bit, the bit where like the pianos came in and the strings and all of that, and but the rest of it he doesn't really get. But then I can't remember exactly what it was where I was explaining to him that with dance music, at least the music I produce, you tend to have like a build up where like people are just kind of like getting into it, and then you have a breakdown where everyone just relaxes a little bit, and that's where you have like the emotional stuff that comes in, and then it builds up and it builds up, and to the point where you have that great rush when the beat comes back in, and you get all the endorphins coming in. And he was like, oh, I get it now. I get why you do this. It's really designed to be danced to. And whilst I see a lot of people or hear a lot of people just listening to music like this these days, like, it's absolutely fine. If you like the music, you can listen to it. But it really is designed for the dance floor. And
you're also designing it for other DJs to play it.
Yep.
That's part of the intent is you're putting it together so DJs that are out at festivals are playing your music. So
Yeah.
is that part of the publishing process? I mean, are you actually trying it, like an old school music guy like me? So we were talking before we started, and Maiden was your first concert, which just blows me away because I wish that Maiden had been my first concert, even though the Beach Boys was pretty cool. But I've seen Maiden a dozen times, and that was my son Gavin's second concert because Rush was first, but second. So growing up in that era of music and having worked in the music industry in the 90s, there was this whole process of, how do you get a record label to sign your band? And then from there you make albums, and from albums, then, the internet wasn't even part of the world then. How has that changed now? When you're actually making a song, you're using clips from other musicians' songs. How do you get something published? Or are you publishing your own song and then hoping others use it? How does that work?
So for me, I'm publishing my own songs and then having other people use it. Now, in like the dance music arena, there is definitely scope for taking other people's songs and cutting them up, taking samples and releasing them, and that's what a lot of people do, and that's fine. There's a lot of music uses that kind of samples. The one problem I would say with that is if you're using other people's music, you need to have those samples cleared, and so that's something that I try to steer away from because it's just an extra step in the publishing process that you need to get through. I will say now, having never had music published back in the 90s or early 2000s, I can't really speak to how it works. But what I will say was just it was a mental blocker for me when I was writing stuff. But you've got to get what is sitting on your computer and coming out of your speakers onto a piece of vinyl and into the hands of a DJ. And I was just like, well, how do I do this? How I'm going to have to send this out to labels, and then they're going to have to like it, and they're going to have to get it pressed. And it felt like something that was so unobtainable. And that's probably incorrect. I was probably just not really putting my mind to it. I think I probably could have got there if I'd really tried. But where it's different now is you're really trying to get onto streaming services. And there is still the need to get your music out to DJs, but you've got sites like Beatport, which is a website that hosts virtually every single piece of dance music that's out there, and you're just getting the MP3 or the WAV file or whatever it may be. So that process has become so much more streamlined, and it means that so many more people are able to get their music out there, which is amazing. So in terms of the process that I go through is I will send my music once it's finished. I will send it out to labels that I think may sign it, and more often than not, I'll get a thanks, love it, but we're good. And so all you need is just one of those labels to say, hey, yeah, love it, let's release it. And then at that point, they really take care of the rest of it. And it is possible to self-publish your own music. I see a lot of people doing that, and it's another perfectly valid way to do things. The reason why I like working with record labels is because often they have relationships with DJs, or they send promo lists out to a list of DJs, and so there's always that opportunity for a big DJ to take your music and go and pick it up. So that's why I end up working with those labels, and I found it's worked reasonably well so far. Nothing has really blown up for me yet, but
tell me about the name, your artist name, and how people can find you.
My artist name is Maxeus. So where that came from, my last dog was called Max, and so his full name is Maximus. I'm gonna call myself Maximus. Just going to type this into a few websites. Oh, there's a ton of people called Maximus. And Mary, my wife, will take credit for Maxeus, I think. And so it was a name that somehow was not being used anywhere in the world of dance music. And so that's why it was used, and it stuck.
That's awesome. Have you done collaborations? Have you worked with other artists?
My last release was actually a collaboration with a British vocalist called Julia Folks. And she was a friend of a friend who she had been following me on Instagram, and then she reached out one day and said, hey, by the way, if you're ever looking for a singer, just let me know, and we can see if it works out. And so I had an idea in my head, and I jotted it down, just got some of the basic chords down, and I sent it over to her, and I said, here's something that I'm working on, and I'd also come up with some lyrics, and I sung them, and I sent that over, and then like within 24 hours, she'd sent back different lyrics, different melody, which is way better than what I had produced, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Yes, let's work together. And so, it was interesting kind of going back and forth over the 9-hour time difference, 8-hour time difference, and her being in the UK and me being in the US, but we made it work, and we got that out, and so that was a really interesting experience, and I hope to do more of that.
So you talked about live, doing this for the dance clubs. Have you ever heard your own music live, where somebody else was playing it and maybe didn't or did know you were in the audience?
Yeah, so that was the funny thing, was having made music and having got it published, I still never actually heard it in a club environment, because I was trying to, as I said before, I was trying to make it as a DJ in the Seattle scene before COVID hit. And then once COVID started to subside and people started getting back into the clubs, I was going out and I was trying to get myself known. And I realized there are so many people trying to do this. And, I'm like one of about 100 DJs in the same position in the Seattle area, trying to make it as a DJ. And so I realized that, I may get to go out and play on my own music from time to time, but it's not really going to be something that happens terribly often, unless I blow up and become a huge artist. So I am very much into a label called Anjuna Beats, and there's a lot of artists on that label that I greatly admire. It's exactly the kind of music that I want to produce myself, and hopefully one day maybe I'll even get to release on that label. And so I'd produced a couple of songs where I was pretty pleased with them, and so I started sending them out to artists directly. And there's an artist called Genix who I'm a big fan of, and I got on his email address of someone who knew him, and I knew that he was coming to Seattle, and so I sent him these tunes, and he responded straight away, and he said, "Hey, I'm listening to these on my phone, but they sound really good. We'll let you know." Didn't hear anything. I went to the club that night when he was playing, and the club was the Underground. It was an institution in Seattle for a long time.
Yes,
sadly,
it is. I've been there.
Yeah, I mean, sadly it's no longer there.
Right.
But Genix was a big fan of that place as well. He actually named one of his recent tracks "The Underground," which was very cool. So I was there with Mary that night and saw him playing, and I was just thinking, is he going to play it? Is he going to play it? And then I heard him mixing it in. Like, I heard the intro, and I said to Mary, he's playing it. I'm not going to use the words I use.
Yeah, right.
Lots of expletives, but I was like, I can't believe it. He's playing it. And it was the first time I'd ever heard my music on a sound system like that. And so, part of the worry that you have as an artist is like, what's my music actually going to sound like when it's on a big system? And it sounded great. It sounded like other music that was being played that night. And so I was absolutely delighted. But then I went and stood at the back, and I did the Instagram thing. I filmed, but I wanted to capture this moment, and the crowd just went wild. It was the first time that night that the crowd had really gone crazy, and the guy who was controlling the air cannons set off the air cannons, and everyone was jumping around, and it was so exhilarating, and I just couldn't believe it. And I messaged him afterwards, and I just thanks so much. And so we chatted for a bit, and he said, yeah, there's nothing like hearing your music for the first time. I remember the first time I heard my music, and so I was so grateful. It wasn't just any old DJ who was playing music the first time I heard it. It was someone who I really respected. And so, I mean, I will never get that feeling again. You never get your first time again. So, that was amazing.
Oh, that is amazing. I wish I could have seen Mary jumping around, because I'm sure you were in the back doing Instagram shots, but she was probably freaking out.
She was filming as well. I couldn't use that video because the number of expletives that were coming out of her mouth as well. But yeah, she loved it too.
That's awesome. What a cool, I've always wondered, with the bands that I like, when was the first time, that they heard one of their songs on the radio, or, they're sitting on wherever it is, and boom, one of their songs comes out. Do you look around at people and go, do you know that I wrote that? That's my song. So it must have been really fun for you to watch the crowd react the way that they did, knowing, hey, they dig this. This is cool.
And that's the thing I was more interested in. And I think this is when you become an artist, you start looking at music not just as something to enjoy, but I was looking at how they were reacting, and in the flow of the song, like, were they reacting in the way I wanted them to at the right points? And as it was, they were. But this is something that you hear a lot from established artists, is when they're writing music, because they write a lot of it, they'll often just go out when they're playing their own music and they'll audition it. And sometimes the crowd goes wild, and sometimes the crowd is just flat, and they're like, oh.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, so it's back to the drawing board, or just scrap that. And so that was always a worry of mine, was when you see or hear your music being played out live, is it going to elicit that reaction that you want? And so to see that happen was really gratifying.
That's fantastic. Do you aspire to have your music in big festivals? Are you, what are you looking at next in the progression of how you've been doing this?
Yeah.
I've seen some of the huge music festivals. I mean, they're massive. I mean, it's like the huge rock festivals in England. There, tens of thousands of people at these, events that have huge stages and laser shows. And, 50-foot video screens. Is that where you're looking?
I think it would be fun to see or hear my music being played there. I'm kind of old school in that I like the dark, dirty, smoky clubs, and where people, you don't really get it as much these days, but where people aren't really paying attention to the DJ, where people are just vibing to the music. That's the kind of place that I want my music to be played. And I think festivals have a place, that's for sure. And I know it tends to be where a lot of people go to listen to this kind of music nowadays. So there is music that works very well on big sound systems like that. And I feel like some of that music just feels very weird when it's being played on a small system in a small club. I don't know if I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but I'm trying to create music that will work in either place. I would love it to be played in the small clubs, as I say, but if you see it like a massive crowd vibing to it as well, that would be very cool.
There's always trends in music. Do you feel that there's trends in this style of music? Are you looking back from the 90s, because you've been doing this for a long time, or at least studying it for a long time? Are there trends? Are there certain musicians or artists that you're following that you see trends changing, up and down, or in a certain direction?
Yeah, very much so. It can be the speed of the music. It can be the types of synths that are being used. I mean, what you tend to find in dance music is someone will use a particular sound that maybe hasn't been heard before, and then all of a sudden you hear everyone using that sound. And so, yeah, you do tend to see those trends. Actually, it kind of makes me think of Keith Richards. I read his autobiography, and he was talking about when they wrote Satisfaction, he was using a particular sound. I don't know if it was like a pedal or whatever that he got. And it was something that hadn't really been used in that kind of music up until that point. And so suddenly it blew up because it had been used by the Rolling Stones. And so it's on a smaller scale nowadays, but yeah, very much like the types of sounds that you hear do get used very often by more artists. And so it's like you have to strike a balance, because like I said before, you need your music to fit in with everything else that's going into a DJ set. but at the same time, you don't just want to copy what someone else is doing, because then it just blends into everything else.
Do you pull from other genres of music? Do you? I mean,
Yeah.
what are your musical interests? So if you're not listening to dance music or your own music, what else are you listening to?
I have very weird taste in music, because I like to listen to dance music, but then other than that, I'm really into bluegrass.
Really, bluegrass?
I really like bluegrass. I really like folk music. I like stuff that has a good melody to it, and so that's what I tend to go back to. And like I say, it's even going back to heavy metal. I look at Iron Maiden. You mentioned Metallica. These are all bands that just had an amazing ear for a tune, and you take away the distortion, and it is just beautiful music. And so if I'm looking for inspiration, I will often go to other genres, because it's very easy to listen to something that's in the same genre. I think I kind of like that, but then you end up writing something that just basically sounds the same, and so I feel like like you're really missing a beat if you're just doing that.
Yeah, there's a music series called The Evolution of Metal. I don't know if you've ever seen it before. It's fantastic. He took different segments of metal or of rock and would go all the way back to where it started. And it was fascinating for me because he was into Sabbath. He loved Sabbath. And then he went back and realized that Dvorak, if you take Dvorak, he compared the two. And if you listen to Dvorak's symphonies, they sound, eerily similar to Sabbath.
Yeah, I will say that the thing I do find hard about this particular genre of music, I mean, if you take it all the way back to classical music, then yeah, you do see the same progressions and the same melodies and so on, but that music would tend to ebb and flow and progress and change, and then you bring in different instruments, and you've got sometimes 30 minutes of a symphony or whatever it is, and it's all very, very different throughout. With music nowadays, it is just you get like a 4x4 beat. You get the same pattern going on through a track, which for dance music is kind of necessary,
Right.
because again, you're writing for someone to dance to, and the interesting thing about writing dance music is you kind of need to make it predictable, because you're writing for people who've never heard it before, and they're kind of like jamming, and when it builds up, they kind of know what they're going to do, and if it builds up and they're ready to go wild, and then you suddenly cut it all out, and sometimes this happens in dance music, but it can really throw people off their vibe. And so it's important for it to be repetitive, it's important for it to be predictable, but that makes it very hard to be original. And particularly if you're dealing with just like a very short repetitive hook, you will find that I will be writing something, and then I just have this horrible dawning moment that I think I've heard this before. And then I'll go back through my collection of music, and I'm like, crap, I'm basically writing this tune that I've obviously had in my head. And so sometimes you can amend it, sometimes you just have to scrap it and start again.
So do your kids listen to your music?
They do, yeah. My daughter and my son, they both listen to them. But my daughter says to her friends that her favorite artist is her dad. So
hey, there you go, proud papa moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen your wife dance to it, because back in the COVID days, she would dance in front of the screen when you were mixing on your kitchen counter, in the early days.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I guess one thing I haven't touched on is these days, it's not enough to simply write music. You really need to know how to promote it, and this is something that I'm just not any good at yet. Maybe I'll get there, but using social media to promote your music is really how I would say the artists who are breaking out now have really got their social media game locked down, and so I need to work on that.
Is that how someone finds the dance clubs and the places that are playing this music? Is it social media?
It can be, yeah. I find a lot of artists use Instagram, and it's very weird using such a visual medium to promote music. And I will find that I'm trying to promote my music, and people are like, oh yeah, I like your post. Do they click through the link to the music? No, they don't. So it's something that I'm trying to refine at the moment. But whilst I was doing Twitch during COVID, and like you say, I was in my kitchen with my decks, and then Mary would be dancing behind, and yeah, people love those videos. It was the one where Mary was dancing, and I've got people saying, "Hey, you should come and look at this." I'm like, maybe I should use it as a backing dancer more often.
Well, I've got video of it too, because I think I texted you guys and was like, "Hey, Mary, does she know she's on camera?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, she knows she's on camera.
She loves to perform." Yeah.
Oh yeah." So if you could give insight for somebody who's starting, like today, they haven't had since the 90s to be thinking about this. Somebody who really loves music and has gone to the clubs and who has that drive to try and make music, what suggestions, support would you give to them?
Do you know what? It's funny you're asking this, because again, this is a social media thing. I just started using Threads. Never been a fan of Twitter, but Threads I've started using, and I find that there's a lot of producers on there at the moment who I feel like they have all of this like knowledge and experience inside them, and they want to get it out, and so everyone is just throwing out advice. And so Threads is a good place to go and look for advice here. It's hard to know if there's any like one particular thing to pick out, but I would say that there's a couple of ways to approach making the kind of music that I do. Like, you don't have to be musical. I was a classically trained pianist, and so that's where I came from. But I would also say that it has taken a long time for me to train myself to stop doing, these like really flouncy things on the piano in a piece of dancing music, because it doesn't really fit. People who don't have that kind of musical training, but maybe have like a good sense of technology, and they learn things quickly, you can very easily get into making this music. It helps to learn the theory, and I would say learning, if you want to write melodic music, learning chords and what how scales work and so on. I hated theory when I was learning it. It was so boring. I hated writing stuff down. I just wanted to play the piano. But now I can look back at that and really appreciate it, because in a style of music where you are doing repetitive patterns and you want to make those interesting, having that grounding in theory really, really helps.
So is this a hobby for you, or is this a future career? And I know your wife is sitting behind us, so careful how you answer.
Well, and Mary is, one of the people who pushes me the hardest here. And she keeps on saying, like, don't be defeatist. You're going to make it. And, she's always pushing me, which is fantastic. When I released my first single, I thought, this is it. I'm going to make it as a musician now. I was really, really very bullish about it. And it released on Spotify. And so like you have this app now, Spotify for Artists. And so I'm watching the plays, and I was getting about 100 plays a day, and I was like, oh, not bad. This is probably about the average for a new artist. And then I had my second release, and I'd been working with an artist called JTech, and he does tutoring, and so I was using him as a tutor, and he was helping me a lot. He's one of the artists on the label Anjuna Beats that I had mentioned. And he'd been helping me with 3 songs, and then he said, "Hey, I'd be up for releasing these as an EP." And I was like, "This is amazing! This is it! I've made it!" And so I really felt like this was going to be the stepping stone for me to kind of like launch my music career. And I'm thinking, I can go and quit my job at Microsoft and all this kind of stuff. And then it came around to launch day, and I'm watching the plays, and there was nothing. And I was like, what's going on? Is it broken? And I was like getting in touch with Spotify support, saying that I'm not seeing any plays. And they said, no, sometimes it takes a while to catch up. But it just didn't blow up the way I was expecting it to. And what I came to learn with Spotify is like playlists are everything. And my first tune had got onto a relatively well-subscribed playlist. And so that's how people were finding it. With my second release, it didn't get onto a playlist, and so people weren't finding it. And so nothing really happened there. And so I was really down for a while, and I was kind of upset that this hadn't happened. But I just, I keep producing the music, and sometimes it gets picked up by playlists, sometimes it doesn't. For me, Spotify plays aren't everything. I would much rather have my music being picked up by a DJ and being played in the club, then have Spotify plays. So Spotify plays are a bonus, and it's a good, promotional tool if, as an artist, it looks like you've got lots of listeners. But again, I'm much happier when I see that people playing it in clubs. Related to that, with Apple, you release your music on Apple. Apple now owns Shazam, and Shazam, I find, is probably the best barometer of people playing your music live, because Shazam is when people are hearing a piece of music and then they've held their phone up and they've Shazammed it to find out what it is. And I see the number of Shazams coming through my music. And so even if I've not had a release in a few months and maybe I'm not getting a lot of plays on Spotify, suddenly it was so bizarre. I was suddenly getting hundreds of Shazams in Des Moines, in Iowa, and what's going on? Iowa? It's not really a hotbed of dance music as far as I'm aware. And so I was like searching, like, what clubs are there? Who might be playing it? I still haven't found out.
Really?
But to be getting hundreds of Shazams means that there must have been thousands of people hearing it. And so I still don't know what it was. But it's my favorite thing is just seeing where people are listening to it.
So you really don't know when someone's going to play your music. Because I was going to say, how does somebody go to a club and listen to your music? But it's just not the way that works.
You just don't know.
You won't know.
There is so much music being produced nowadays that if you don't blow up like in that window, like when you've just released, then there's a good chance that nothing's going to happen with it. And so in the first, week or two, I'm hoping that I'm going to start seeing it being played in places. And if it does, then I'm really happy. If it doesn't, then it's like whatever. But then every now and then you'll just suddenly see one of my older tunes will be picked up and it'll be played somewhere like Istanbul or Moscow. And this is great. And that's what really kind of makes me happy.
Yeah. So for somebody to find you, if they want to listen to the music now that we've been talking about it, where's the best place for people to go? Yeah,
so you can find me on Spotify, or any streaming music service. As I said,
and then search Maxeus.
That's right. Yeah,
Maxeus, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm also on Instagram, Maxeus Music. That's where I tend to post most of my social content. Also on SoundCloud, again, Maxeus Music. I do a mix every month. It's called Maxism. And it has my own music when I release my own music. Otherwise, it's just the kind of music that I like.
It's the best concert you've ever been to, and why?
The best concert I've ever been to. Okay, so I'm going to pick two very, very different ones. First one was Guns N' Roses when I was 11, because I was 11,
yeah,
and it was Guns N' Roses. That was at Wembley Stadium, and it was just incredible. It was... beautiful hot day, seeing Axl Rose / perform on that stage. That they were real performers, so right. that was incredible. The other one I'm going to pick out, the Group Therapy Weekender. This is the Andruna Beats bosses, Above and Beyond. They come to the Gorge every couple of years now, and so. Was it last year or 2 years ago?
And the Gorge is one of the best places in the world to see a concert. It's a venue outside of Seattle, about 2.5 hours east, and it's right on the cliffs, and it is just fantastic.
It's unreal. It's a beautiful location. The sound system is incredible.
Yeah.
I'm amazed at how good it is. And so, going to see them a couple of years ago, that was fantastic too.
Yeah, I almost got killed at the Gorge. Pearl Jam, they knocked a fence over, and I was under the fence.
Oh no!
And people were going over me.
Oh wow!
That was an interesting day. So, well, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. You educated me on this whole different genre of music that I only listened to it because of you, and it was fun to hear a different take on it. Last question for you. Hardest one. Favorite dessert.
Favorite dessert. So I'm British. You might be able to tell.
Maybe.
British desserts, I would say, are some of the best in the world, and sticky toffee pudding. If you can get sticky toffee pudding in the Lake District in the UK, you're not going to find it much better than that.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Cut. Sweet. That was fantastic. That was really good. Yeah.
Spotted fish. That's a weird dessert.
That's right. Man.